investigate report concerns regarding the presence of manganese in the 2 cargoes of mogas supplied to Mauritius by Hafnia Libra and STI Executive. Mr. Speaker, sir, I am informed that the costs of the investigation carried out by Minton, Triham and Davis Limited were borne by Vitol Bahrain EC itself, and the information is not available to us. As regard to part... Can I continue? As regard to part C of the question, I am informed by STC that specifications agreed with Vitol Bahrain EC are identical to these specifications used for Manglo as from 2016. The mogas supplied by Vitol Bahrain EC was therefore conformed to the specifications. Concerning part D of the question, when the report confirmed the presence of manganese in the consignment of the Hafnia Libra, discussions were carried out with Vitol Bahrain EC, and they were requested to make sure that for the next consignment, that is, for Analypsis Lady, the fuel supplied should be manganese-free. I am further informed, Mr. Speaker, sir, that on 12 December 2019, a delegation led by the then Minister of Commerce went to France to discuss with Vitol Bahrain EC on the question of presence of manganese in the 2 consignments of Hafnia Libra and STI Limited Executive. The outcome of the meeting in France revealed, firstly, the direct relation between the level of manganese present in the consignment of Hafnia Libra and STI Executive and the technical problems faced by car owners had not yet been established beyond reasonable doubt. Secondly, notwithstanding the level of manganese, the 2 consignments were fully compliant with the specification of that contract. Thirdly, the report of the Motor Vehicle Dealers Association as to the number of cars concerned and the quantum of compensation was excessively high. And finally, there was need for further tests to be carried out to conclusively establish that the problem faced by car owners and Motor Vehicle Dealers Association could be attributable to the presence of manganese. In this respect, the final report of Minton, Triham and Davis Limited, submitted on the 24th February 2020, confirmed that all the manganese was present in the 2 consignments from Hafnia Libra and STI Executive. It has not been possible to determine the exact level of manganese present because different parameters used for testing resulted in different levels. The report also concludes that there is insufficient data to attribute the engine damage to manganese solely, and that the majority of the vehicle users in Mauritius do not appear to have encountered such engine damage relating to the presence of manganese. Finally, the report mentioned that the problem may alternatively have been that some cars imported with high specification as from 2013 and onward were compatible with the specification of mogas. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, may I just ask the Honourable Minister whether this Vitol is the same Vitol that was in December 2020 punished with a 6.7 billion rupee fine following an FBI investigation in contrast given by Brazil, Ecuador, and Mexico for petroleum purchases. Is he aware of that?
No, I'm not aware.
Well, I will table, Mr. Speaker, since he's not aware, I will table full details for the Minister and the press about this condemnation by following an FBI investigation. I hope we don't get the same FBI investigation in Mauritius. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the Honourable Minister whether the claim would appear to be against Vitol for adulterated mogas. whether it is, you find it not absolutely ridiculous that it is Vitol itself that appoints the consultant, Milton, to check whether it is possible that it has missupplied Mauritius? Is that the independent inquiry that the previous minister promised in this House? And there's Hansard here, following an excellent PNQ by my predecessor. Independent inquiry. It is paid by the person who is at fault. Can I get an answer, please?
Well, Mr. Speaker, sir, the firm appointed to carry out the inquiry, surely it was an independent firm. But the choice, it was done in consultation with the STC. And listen, we cannot cast doubt on the independence of the...
Mr. Speaker, public opinion, the FBI, everyone will decide whether in fact it is normal when you are trying to sue someone for 3,300 vehicles that have been damaged in Mauritius, that it is that person who is being sued should appoint the consultant, so-called consultant, as mentioned by previous Minister Sominaden. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask Honourable Minister whether you'll tell us from what SGS France has said, what was the actual level of manganese found in Hafnia Libra and STI executive consignments?
Well, I have undertaken to to table the report, and then it is report of SGI France. Well, the report says that the level of manganese in Natia was 76 milligram per liter. And
Order,
76.
Yeah. This is question time. You own PNQ, you have to respect your PNQ.
Well, it is contained in that report. You can have a look.
I have another question for the Minister.
Please.
It's okay, he'll table it. Let him table it.
Please, don't
Let
give me
him table it. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask Honourable Minister
have
whether...
you finished?
Yes.
Please.
Well, the question
Please.
he asked...
Listen to me. What's wrong? You finished with your reply, Minister?
Mr. Speaker, sir, the question the Honourable Leader of Opposition asked as regard to the level of manganese found in the 2 shipments. Okay? I have the report with me, and I'm tabling same. He can take cognizance of it. So we just not go in details, because they are of a specification as well.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the Minister whether he has taken cognizance of what was in fact tabled by his predecessor of the agreed specifications between STC and Vitol Bahrain. This was from the House itself. And whether he has taken cognizance of the STC tender, which was issued in March 2019, whereas the STC tender, would you believe, includes a maximum amount of 2 milligrams per liter for manganese, you've just said there's 74, and surprise, surprise, the agreed specifications tabled in this House make no mention at all of manganese, and incorrectly you have said that Mangalo, there was no mention of manganese, whereas I'm tabling also the agreed specifications with Mangalo, which says properly no additive containing Mangalo should be added. So, I know you are new at the post, Mr. Minister, I'm not blaming you at all, but I'm just saying that this House deserves frank and clear answers. So, yes. Mr. Speaker, my question is this. Is the Minister aware that improperly refined petrol has manganese added, so that becomes RON 95, and it is about 10% cheaper than proper petrol, RON 95, properly refined petrol, and that, Mr. Speaker, would amount to about 150 million rupee saving on that 6-month contract, notwithstanding the huge damage made to the cars. Do you understand my point, Mr. Speaker?
I do understand, but need to give some explanation before. Mr. Speaker, sir, when STC signed the contract with Mangalore, in that original contract, mention was made in the specification as regard to the level of manganese to be supplied for a clean petroleum. Actually, Mr. Speaker, sir, Mangalore Refinery and Petrochemical Limited used to supply Mogas since 2006 on the basis of an agreed contract on which mention was made. Like I said, was made that the level of manganese should be less than 2 milligrams per liter. The arrangements with MRPL lasted up until July 2016. However, in 2016, the contract and specifications were slightly altered to remove the reference to that effect that the level of manganese should be less than 2 milligrams per liter. That was in 2016. And it was an omission, I should say, on the part of the officer who prepared that document. Because I am informed by the STC, Mr. Speaker, sir, that the explanation given for no reference in that specification as regard to the level of manganese, I am informed that it was altered to delete the requirement of by an officer of the STC, and Mangalore Refinery, despite the alteration made, continued to supply petrol with the level of manganese at less than 2 milligrams per liter. So it was continued. Then what happened is...
Please!
And
You can't infer parliament like this. The minister is replying. And you don't intervene in my work. This is not the issue. The issue is the minister is replying. You have to wait.
reply, Mr. Speaker. So let me answer. What happened when the contract was allocated after a tendering exercise in 2019 to Vitol? So they used the same specifications that was in 2016 when the contract was again allocated to Mangalore Refinery. So in that 2016, since there was no reference to manganese level, obviously in the 2019 contract, there was no reference to manganese level to be present.
Given Vitol's record for corruption, I don't believe a word that I've been told just now. I will table the contract, the tender, dated March 2019. I don't know why the minister is going back to 2016. March 2019, it says clearly manganese content, maximum 2 milligrams per liter. So it was not forgotten here. Whereas when the lowest supplier of this tender was given the contract through emergency procurement, it was forgotten then? Is that what? Forget about Mangalore. We are talking about this March 2019, Honorable Minister. How can you tell me it was forgotten when it was here? And we were talking about the lowest tender for this particular tender, which was then given as emergency procurement, and we know about what emergency procurement means. And I will table this also with your permission, Mr. Speaker. I will retable what was tabled before by the Honourable Minister as to the agreed specifications for ease of reference. I will table Mangalore, its agreed specifications, Mr. Speaker.
Well,
I have nothing more.
I am, Mr. Speaker, sir, I am informed that the document that is being tendered, it is in respect to a tender that was cancelled. And then, no, listen, it's very serious. This document pertains to a tender which was cancelled, and then procurement was done through emergency procurement procedures after. So I'm making reference earlier when I stated that there was no mention as regard to the level of manganese. That reference was in respect to the contract allocated with the using the emergency procedures.
It's new. He should have referred to the previous PNQ's reply here in this House, in that when they went to see Vitol Bahrain, it was following their tender being the lowest tender in that particular tender which I've just tabled. So it is totally related. Is that, Mr. Speaker, I want to now come to the SGS. So what you have admitted, Mr. Speaker, is in fact what the Honourable Minister Sominaden, previous minister, told us, but in veiled words. That is, all the adulterated petrol supplies agreed to specifications because the specifications themselves were wrong, and therefore SGS continued to give clean testing certificates because they were not testing for manganese. Is that, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Minister, Honourable Minister, what in fact you have said, and I'm just confirming it?
I did not say that, Mr. Speaker, sir, because SGS, they were not testing for manganese when the petroleum product was being discharged in Mauritius. They were only checking the level or the quantity of the products.
Given that we have 3,300 car owners that have suffered, some terribly suffered, cars actually have had to be scrapped, as we know today, resulting from what the minister said, a deliberate or not deliberate omission in the tender specifications. Will STC now, despite the fact that you have so many billions to pay, will STC do the right thing and compensate immediately all the persons that have suffered from this and not wait for the court case, because you yourself have admitted today, Mr. Speaker, that there was an omission on the part of STC. Deliberate or not, that is for someone else to find out.
Yes. Mr. Speaker, sir, let me come back to the previous question. SGS, they started to test for manganese in the petroleum product as from December 2019. So before December 2019, they were not testing for manganese in petroleum product. As regard to this question, Mr. Speaker, sir, unfortunately, there are several cases before the court. And obviously, I will not comment on these cases as they are sub judice. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the Honourable Minister whether, in fact, what is, in fact, the Minister proposing, in fact? Is he proposing that we continue like that? What about the 3,300 motor vehicle owners?
I am not...
What about the fact that you need to investigate whether it was deliberate or not deliberate, this omission? What are you, in fact, proposing? Because it was your predecessor before.
Mr. Speaker, sir, this will be for the court to decide. There is a report from a firm called Minton, Trehan, Davis Group. The report is sufficiently detailed, and the issues canvassed in that report will be flushed out or discussed in court. So at this stage, I cannot take any commitment.
Mr. Speaker, that we were supplied with a petrol which had a lot of manganese in it. You agree yourself. This petrol is far cheaper than properly refined petrol. And we know that we have at least 2 shipments of this adulterated petrol arriving in Mauritius. What was the claim that government made against Vitol for this? Did you ask for a reduction in price?
But our, just 1 minute, bear with me, Mr. Speaker, sir. The contract we had with Vitol has ended, and they will supply us to the new specifications given to them. So before, like you said, there were no mention of manganese. This is done. They will supply according to the new specifications.
May I ask the Minister, given that the adulterated petrol was supplied in October and November, at least these 2 months, and a few months later, on the 1st of February 2020, this same Vitol, having received an emergency procurement contract for 6 months, was given a second emergency procurement contract. At what price? It was never disclosed, for another 6 months. Is that the case? That there have been, in fact, despite all this, 2 emergency procurement contracts given to Vitol, the same supplier that has been punished by FBI and US State Department of Justice?
Well, I don't have this information with me. I'm not aware that another contract was given.
You're getting a bit of paper. It is coming. Is that the case?
Yes, I am informed that, yes, there was another contract given to Vitol, but not under the same condition as the previous one. It was under a different condition, that is manganese-free.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister did not mention the magic word. Is it emergency procurement, please? Can you give us the magic word?
Like I said, I have been forwarded with an answer, but whether it was under emergency procurement, I cannot answer at the moment. Can the Minister tell us,
this is my last question, by the way, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister tell us the trip to Paris, the famous trip to Paris by previous Minister Somi Naden for the long weekend? Was that, in fact, who accompanied officially the Minister on that trip?
I'm informed that the former Director General of STC, Mr. Ramasomi, accompanied the former Minister of Commerce to meet with Vitol.
Whether the same Mr. Ramasomi?
And then the permanent secretary of my ministry also formed part of that delegation.
So 3 of these persons were subsequently fired. Can I ask one last thing, since we have a little bit of time? The previous minister went on and on about octane boosters, so many kilos, thousands of kilos of octane boosters, that according to him was a plausible excuse for the problems, were absolutely false, of course. Did the ministry take any action to ban octane boosters from importation in Mauritius?
Well, octane boosters have been used in this country since a long time, and it's still being used by vehicle owners, okay? So it was common practice for the use of octane boosters to complement with the quality of petrol. Mr. Speaker, sir, earlier, just on a point of clarification, earlier the Honourable Leader of the Opposition filed a report suggesting or insinuating that the owner of Vitol was prosecuted. I am informed that Vitol was fined by the US Department of Justice in December 2020 and in 2019, so that was after. In 2019, there was no conviction and there was no case against Mr.
Oh, time is over.
Given-
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Your officer should be diligent and time over.
Motion.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to move that all the business on today's order paper be exempted from the provisions of paragraph 2 of Standing Order 10.
The question is that all the business on today's order paper be exempted from the provisions of paragraph 2 of Standing Order 10. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it.
Statements by ministers none. Public bill second reading.
Honorable Minister Jua Gabriel.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me the floor. I cannot start my intervention without first paying tribute to late Sir Nehru Jagannath, a true patriot who dedicated his life to this country. It is always a pleasure to address the National Assembly on the budget debate. May I, at the very outset, put on record my thanks to the Honourable Minister of Finance and his team for the budget 2021-2022. During the preparation of the budget, my colleague, the Honourable Minister of Finance, took the time to meet each minister personally, PPS, honourable members of government, and other stakeholders. I must say he has been very responsive. In normal times, we know how difficult it is to present a good budget, but now in such a crisis situation, the exercise becomes even more daunting. So my gratitude goes to the Minister of Finance and his team who have worked tirelessly to process the budget. I want to take a moment to thank our Prime Minister, Honourable Pravin Kumar Jagannath, for his vision and leadership. Our Prime Minister is a man of action and is doing his utmost to move this country forward. Mr. Speaker, we have a mandate of 5 years. This is our second budget. There are 3 more budgets to come. We are confident that each future budget will bring new measures for the well-being of our people. The budget 2021-2022 has been prepared and presented during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Behave yourself, Leader of the
A
Opposition.
very difficult
There's an
time.
order going on.
A very difficult time for all of us at a global level. This crisis, Mr. Speaker, is without precedent. We are all navigating without a map. Events are evolving in minutes, not in hours, days, or weeks. We cannot ignore the fact that this pandemic has a direct and dramatic impact on the daily lives of every single person around the world. COVID-19 has turned the global economy upside down with a devastating impact on the economy of all countries, leading to social issues. Each government could have a different approach to this crisis. But one thing is certain, Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 pandemic presents a crisis that requires government action with important social and economic outcomes. Balancing the social and economic aspects is indeed a complex task. However, what is important is that the budget has successfully struck the balance between the two. With the present budget, the Minister of Finance has given the government the necessary tools to respond quickly to events, to boost the economy, and also to continue supporting the most vulnerable. Much has been said already on the budget by members on both sides of the House. I have listened attentively to the intervention of members on both sides of the House. What is disappointing is that a number of opposition members doesn't seem to understand the reality we are facing, or are they pretending not to understand? If they would have made the same speeches in other circumstances, I would have understood. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, there is no doubt that people outside understand the seriousness of the situation. The population in general have faith in the budget. They know that the government is leaving no stone unturned to address the challenges our country is facing. Mr. Speaker, following the presentation of the budget, I have had the opportunity to speak to many people from different walks of life. I can tell the House that they warmly welcome the budget. They know that due to COVID-19 pandemic, our priorities are not the same. Our priorities have changed. These are not normal times. Mr. Speaker, the storm is not over. Who can say with certainty what the future holds? We are in a period of uncertainty, and maybe we will have to readjust our priorities as the situation evolves. This is the truth. Let me, at this stage, turn to the business community. Let us see together what do they have to say about the budget 2021-2022. Thankfully, Mr. Speaker, I see that the business community at large, unlike the opposition, has grasped the spirit of the budget. Let us see some of the reactions from major institutions published in the local press. Let me start with Business Mauritius. Le budget mise sur la relance plutôt que l'austérité. Plusieurs mesures annoncées ramèneront la confiance au sein de la communauté des affaires. EY, un budget qui montre une continuité dans la politique et qui devrait inspirer confiance pour la phase de croissance à venir. L'Association des hôteliers et restaurateurs de l'île Maurice. Nous accueillons la réouverture avec soulagement et satisfaction, également soulagés que le gouvernement maintienne jusqu'à septembre l'aide au salaire. Association of Mauritian Manufacturers, un ensemble de mesures à saluer, des mesures pour inciter à la consommation des produits locaux. Mauritius Bankers Association, les mesures annoncées pour le secteur bancaire aideront Maurice à quitter la liste noire de l'Union européenne. Let me end with Mauritius Chamber of Agriculture, l'installation moderne de stockage du sucre de 150 000 tonnes à Richter est favorable à l'industrie. These comments, Mr. Speaker, are not from government members. These comments are from independent institutions. As you can see, Mr. Speaker, the comments are not bad at all. Very encouraging. The institutions understand the present situation. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, what is the reality of the budget? The reality of the budget is that it does a lot to support those who need our care. That is why I applaud the budget. There is a lot in the budget on social care. Allow me, Mr. Speaker, to focus the remainder of my remarks on the array of social measures. Mr. Speaker, our good actions date as far back as 2014. Some actions which come to my mind are the increase in pension, not only basic retirement pension, but all the basic pensions, widows, invalid, orphans, payment of school certificate and higher school certificate examination fees for second-time students. A vast set of measures to fight absolute poverty, to name a few. Mr. Speaker, do you know the total budget of my ministry? 39.26 billion, Mr. Speaker. This amount represents 26.95% of the total national budget.
Social distancing there. Please continue.
Yes. Does the opposition realize how much we are investing in social care? Never in our history, Mr. Speaker, has any government done so much for our people. Our Prime Minister believes in people. That is why I will say anybody can be a critic, mais il faut être responsable dans ses propos. What is wrong with the present budget when so much action is being given to our elderly, persons with disabilities, widows, orphans, and families under the SRM? Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to see that there has been an emphasis on social measures. More funding has been provided. The budget set the tone with a high social agenda. In these difficult times, you will agree, Mr. Speaker, our duty is to shield our people. Allow me to share a few noteworthy statistics regarding beneficiaries under the Social Security Division of my ministry. Since 2014, the beneficiaries of the 4 basic pensions combined have increased from 244,400 to reach 302,606 in the financial year 2020-2021. This represents an increase of 23.8% since 2014. My ministry's budget for pension has therefore more than doubled over the years, from 14.7 billion in 2014 to 36.7 billion in 2020-2021, an increase of 149% for that particular period. Let me tell you the amount budgeted for each basic pension in the estimate of 2021-2022. Basic retirement pension, 28.9 billion. Basic invalidity pension, 3.8 billion. Basic widow's pension, 2.15 billion. Basic orphans pension, 41 million. My colleague, the Minister of Finance, has said it in his budget speech, I quote, "Despite the difficult situation, we have decided to maintain the basic pension at 9,000 rupees monthly for those aged 60 years and above. This is in line with our philosophy." Why, Mr. Speaker, sir? Because nos aînés sont ceux qui nous ont transmis notre histoire, nos croyances et nos valeurs. Nos aînés constituent la fondation de notre société. Notre existence découle de leurs efforts et leurs contributions à la société. Nous devons en être redevables à vie. This is our philosophy, Mr. Speaker. In these difficult times, we could have gone to extreme to reduce basic pensions and other allowances given to vulnerable people. But we did no such thing. We have maintained the support that is being given. In fact, where possible, Mr. Speaker, we have increased the support. So, je laisse la population déduire qui parle un langage de vérité. Mr. Speaker, I would like to briefly comment on one social measure announced in the budget 2020-2021 and implemented thereafter to the satisfaction of the population at large. Visite médicale à domicile. You will recall, Mr. Speaker, that the monthly medical visit at home were provided at a certain point in time only to children with disabilities below the age of 18 and to bedridden persons aged 75 and above. Then, in the budget 2019-2020, this care was extended to bedridden persons aged 60 and above. In the budget 2020-2021, we went a step further. We removed the age criteria on medical home visits for bedridden and severely disabled persons. We are now able to reach out to some 26,000 beneficiaries. Now, to provide a more efficient service, the Ministry has recruited some 250 more medical practitioners in 2020. The home medical visits have increased now from 77,683 to 177,200. This is the reality, Mr. Speaker. I must say also that there is continuity in our actions. Year by year, we are increasing social protection. As such, we are now increasing the basic orphan's pension from 7,000 to 8,000 for beneficiaries up to the age of 23. We are also extending the incontinence allowance to a greater number of beneficiaries by removing the age criteria. Actually, we cater for some 1,423 beneficiaries. Now that this measure has been extended, so we will be catering for 1,265 additional beneficiaries, bringing the total number of beneficiaries to 2,688. Mr. Speaker, coming to disability, our government has a philosophy of inclusiveness. Let me say a few words about the disability bill. We also, on this side of the House, we know that the disability bill is important. Questions have been put by the opposition on the status of the bill, rightly so. I agree that the bill is taking time. However, I can assure the House that the needful is being done for the introduction of the bill in Parliament. We are trying to cover as many aspects as possible, but most importantly, Mr. Speaker, we have to make sure we can implement what we will be proposing. But I want to point also that this doesn't mean that we are waiting for the disability bill to continue enhancing the lives of persons with disabilities. The fact is, since 2014, a set of measures have been taken. The House is aware of all these measures. I will not take the time of the House to enumerate one by one, but we all know that a series of measures have been taken so far. The measures announced in the present budget is yet another signal of our government's duty towards persons with disabilities. The upgrading of 4 public beaches to make them accessible to persons with disabilities. The increase in the budget granted to NGOs running SENS schools from 138 million to 151 million. The grant to new registered NGO to support SENS students with autism and those suffering from visual and hearing difficulties. the upgrading works and setting up of daycare wards for autistic children at the 5 regional hospitals. Accessibility to learning materials, activity books adapted for learners of grade 1 to 6 with visual, hearing, intellectual impairment, as well as autism. And also the acquisition of braille notes for secondary school students with severe visual impairments. This is the reality, Mr. Speaker. Now, let me turn to the Social Integration Division of my ministry. Here, I would like to take a moment to respond to Honorable Yutim, who said, increasing the amount of financial assistance to persons on social register is fine, but is not enough. Honorable Member went further to say that eradicating poverty should not be limited to hands out. True, Mr. Speaker. But what the Honorable Member seems to forget is that government's support is not limited to financial assistance and hands out. Since the implementation of the Marshall Plans Against Poverty in 2016, the Ministry has put in place a number of schemes to support vulnerable households eligible under the Social Register of Mauritius. Yes, this scheme do include financial assistance, but that is not all. We focus on education, housing, training and employment, health, empowerment, mindset and attitude. Our schemes are geared towards ending intergenerational poverty. We want the children to aspire to a better future. We empower vulnerable families so that they may stand on their feet. We provide case management support so they may resolve their issues and lead better lives. What is the ultimate goal, Mr. Speaker? We do not want them to remain dependent on government support forever. We want them to be empowered so they can eventually live independent lives. Allow me to highlight the key measures taken by the ministry so far. Let me start with the monthly subsistence allowance scheme. For the financial year 2020-2021, an amount of 192 million has been paid to some 9,800 households, both in Mauritius and Rodrigue. Since 2016 to June 2021, a total of nearly 1 billion has been disbursed in favor of our beneficiaries. The monthly child allowance paid to encourage families to send their children to school. For 2020-2021, around 44 million was disbursed. Since the introduction of this scheme in January 2017, a total of 362 million has been paid in favor of some 12,000 children. Coming to the school premium scheme in the form of a cash award paid upon successful completion of grade 9, SC, HSC, and tertiary education respectively. For the financial year 2020-2021, a total of 720,000 has been paid in favor of some students who have successfully completed their tertiary education. As you can see, Mr. Speaker, more and more students are striving for a better future, and to the best of our ability, we are giving them all the support. The free examination fees scheme. Since the introduction of the scheme, some 8 million has been paid out. The school materials scheme, for the academic year 2020, some 74 million has been disbursed to a total of 17,177 students. Since 2017, about 199 million has been disbursed to 84,679 children under the SRM. Training programs to allow our beneficiaries to become economically empowered for the financial year 2020-2021, some 1,122 beneficiaries have been trained. We have also addressed life enhancement education program, Mr. Speaker, sir, to boost out the self-esteem, family ties, and communication of our beneficiaries. As at date, a total beneficiaries of 1,199 have benefited from this scheme. We also have the creche scheme, and here, Mr. Speaker, I would like to provide clarification in response to the same honourable member I mentioned earlier. The honourable member at one point spoke of children under the SRM who cannot attend preschools because they cannot afford to pay the fees. This is not correct. Maybe the honourable member is not aware that families under the SRM can benefit from a monthly creche allowance of 2,000 rupees per child, which is paid to registered child daycare centres to enable mothers to take up employment or undergo training. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, let me shortly comment on the new interesting measures announced regarding beneficiaries under the Social Register of Mauritius. Mr. Speaker, we are bringing the poverty threshold to a minimum of 3,000 and a maximum of 10,500 as compared to a minimum of 2,720 to a maximum of 9,520 as mentioned in 2016. What does this mean? This means that the absolute poverty threshold for an adult is increasing from 2,720 to 3,000, while that of a child is increasing from 1,360 to 1,500. This, of course, will allow more families to benefit from support. Now, I think it is interesting to note also what we are doing for vulnerable households who are not eligible under the Social Register of Mauritius. Households earning a monthly income between 10,500 and 14,000 will also be eligible to register for support under the National Database for Vulnerable Groups. Why this measure, Mr. Speaker? You know, during the first confinement in 2020, we realized that there are many people who are not in absolute poverty, but who still need support. COVID-19 has put many families in a more fragile position, so how to help those who are not in absolute poverty, who are not eligible under the SRM, but still need some form of assistance? The National Database for Vulnerable Groups is our proposed solution. Under this new database, eligible households will benefit from empowerment support, educational support, training, employment, opportunities, and life skills. We will achieve this through a collaborative and holistic approach between my ministry and institutions, including NGOs. Provision has also been made for the extension of free access to broadband internet to SRM families. This measure was first introduced in the budget 2019-2020 and has been extended each year since. Around 5,600 families have since gained access to broadband internet with the collaboration of the Mauritius Telecom. I must also remind the House at this point that my ministry has procured tablets for students of grade 10 to 13 who are eligible under the SRM. A first batch of 542 students of grade 10 to 13 have received tablets to enable them to have access to online facilities for their studies. As new families join the SRM, of course, eligible students will benefit from this scheme. Our Prime Minister has always said, Mr. Speaker, that money should not be a barrier to education. All children should have the same chance, the same opportunity. With the measures focused on the provision of technological tools for education, we are making sure children are not left behind. To sum up, Mr. Speaker, there can be no doubt that this is an excellent budget for unpredictable times. The budget is going in the right direction. The budget leaves no one behind. Of course, the challenge now is in the implementation. The announcement of the setting up of a committee to monitor the implementation of the budget measures, to be chaired by the Honorable Prime Minister himself, is warmly welcome. So on this side of the House, we have faith in the budget, and the present budget has the very best intention. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, sir, being among the last interveners, I will try not to debate on issues that have already been canvassed by my colleagues from the opposition side. Having said so and gone through the budget speech, I note at the outset what could be described as economic mismanagement. Let me explain. This budget speech is characterized by flagrant absence of the expected reforms and bold measures that would have helped revive the economy. Our economic indicators are in the red, and the country has performed worse than expected. The GDP in 2020 contracted by almost 15% against an initial forecast of 7%. Our debt to GDP rocketed to 95%, while unemployment increased to 9.2%. And this figure will unfortunately be on the rise this year again. The economy is at a very critical state, and many issues of mismanagement related to COVID in the healthcare and in the industry and commerce ministries are added to the list of problems that are looming over the taxpayers' head. If the finance minister hopes that the economic growth will save him, then he is simply delusional, as he has not convinced us where this growth will come from. The plan to raid the reserves of the Bank of Mauritius is only an accounting treachery that has failed to address overall debt. And Mr. Speaker, sir, today's debt is simply tomorrow's taxes. Mr. Speaker, over the past 5 years, economists have raised the alarm about the precarious state of our economy, given the excessive spending that is being taken from government funds. With the launch of prestige projects and a lack of vigilance regarding public funds in general, our economic situation was deteriorating further. Laws have been enacted to break down the locks of the central bank in order to use copiously, without the slightest restraint, the reserves of the Bank of Mauritius. Mr. Speaker, sir, we have before us a budget that is a repeat of last year's, both in substance and in form. A budget that wants to be respected in public opinion is based on two fundamentals: revenue and expenditure. As, for example, as the head of family, his main concern before thinking about embarking on expenses, he must make sure that he has the means to do so. If he wants to acquire beautiful things for the well-being of his family, he must work harder to increase his income so as not to get bogged down in debt at the risk of mortgaging the very future of his children. But in Mauritius, the Minister of Finance thinks differently. His appetite for debt has no limits. The news is as bleak as can be expected, and this is just a taste. Difficult times are coming, and they will need to be carefully managed. It would be entirely neglectful of us if we don't take this unprecedented opportunity for genuine change. And in the same vein, I also note that this budget speech do not propose anything to curb indebtedness. On the contrary, we continue to borrow massively to finance expenses when we do not produce in terms of economic wealth. As a result, public debt has increased to 420 billion rupees. That is 95% of gross domestic product. The country is in debt up to 420 billion rupees, Mr. Speaker. So can you imagine that? How are we going to bail out our economy? No notable indicators, nothing in sight. With such massive indebtedness, it is the future generation who suffer the consequences. The entire future is being mortgaged. Let the government be warned. The alarm bells have been rung. And at the same time, we can see that our rupee continues to depreciate and losing ground against foreign currencies. Example of euro depreciation reaches 25% and the dollar 20%. I won't go into the details. My colleague has already given the example of commodities. But this has a huge impact on the economic sector as we import almost 3 times more than we export. And as a result, imported products are more expensive, and the bill has been passed automatically to consumers who are already having enormous difficulties in meeting the family's expenses. As a result, the cost of living in Mauritius continue to rise, inevitably of what I call economic mismanagement. Adding to that, it's no surprise that on the other hand, inflation rate has increased. There is no lack. There is also a lack of political will on the part of government to curb inflation. Price controls are almost non-existent. People at the bottom of the ladder will suffer, and this will last. People have to suffer this cascading effect of this erosion of their purchasing power, which has a negative impact on their standard of living. The more so as prices of basic foodstuffs such as chicken, meat, fish, amongst others, continue to rise. The grumbling is spreading all over the economy. Is there a pricing policy? I doubt it, Mr. Speaker. Mercantilism is full swing. Consumers are being skinned. Prices are going up. Family incomes are falling. The country imports massively, as I said, much more than it exports. This is an explosive situation. With the depreciation of rupee, people pay more for their amenities, and the government collects more VAT. We just need to read the item tax on goods and services. The expected VAT revenue will be 75 billion rupees. This speaks volume, Mr. Speaker, sir. It has been increased from 55 billion rupees to 75 billion rupees over a year. That is an increase of 36%. And it is being proclaimed from the rooftops that there will be no additional tax. What a fib, Mr. Speaker, sir. Instead of acknowledging the failure of its monetary and fiscal policy, it persists unsigned. Instead of talking about his previous budget and acknowledging where it didn't work, the Minister of Finance impetuously persists in the same way. Mr. Speaker, sir, the same recipe in a situation of social and economic crisis will necessarily give the same result. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, let me come on some very important issues that has been canvassed by the Director of Audit in his latest report, and some really shocking and disturbing facts. As we are aware, the National Audit Office constitutes the supreme audit institution of Mauritius. and is headed by the Director of Audit. The Office of the Director of Audit is established under the Constitution of Mauritius, and to develop an independent and objective assessment of the process of governance and to enhance legislative oversight on government operations. The Constitution of Mauritius provides for the appointment, authority, and specific conditions of service of the Director of Audit, as well as his independence and security of tenure. Section 110 of the Constitution provides that in the exercise of his function, the Director of Audit shall be subjected to the direction and control of no person or authority. In response to COVID-19, government had, over the period March to December 2020, spent some 14 billion rupees on the procurement of medical products, payments under assistance scheme, and quarantine charges. The whole procurement exercise has been managed by several authorities, but mainly by the high-level committee set up at the level of the Prime Minister's office. The remarks of the Director of Audit were really disturbing in terms of limitation in the performance of his duties. He stated, Mr. Speaker, sir, the scope of my audit was severely affected by the non-availability of important records and information in various cases. This speaks volume, Mr. Speaker, sir. While carrying out his audit, he stated that my staff faced considerable difficulties to obtain records. The National Audit Office was informed by the ICAC, which secured 60 procurement files from the Ministry of Health and Wellness for its inquiry. Information regarding procurement procedures was requested from the Ministry of Health, but most remain unattended till date. That is, at the date he was writing his report. In these circumstances, the scope of the audit was heavily impaired, so he could not perform his audit. On 25th of January, after the completion of the audit, the Ministry informed National Audit Office that there is no objection on his part for National Audit Officers to access this file at ICAC, Mr. Speaker. Only after they have done their job, completed the audit, then the files were made available to the auditors. Clearly, this was a delaying tactic. This was clearly a delaying tactic to prevent the auditors from doing their job. And these critics are not from me. It's from the Director of Audit. You can't accuse the opposition of saying things or inventing things that does not exist, Mr. Speaker. And if we go into the details, I will give some example whereby 60 ventilators were acquired for 94 million, for which no benefits have yet been derived. 50 of these ventilators were acquired from a foreign company which have never supplied any medical equipment to the ministry. The contract of the supply of 37 out of 46 drugs that was awarded directly to a wholesale pharmacy, which was not a regular supplier to the ministry. And we know who it was. And this one is, I think this is the best of. There was a significant increase in the price quoted, ranging from 15% to 3,300%. I've never heard of such thing, Mr. Speaker. 3,300% increase in the price of 37 drugs procured under the emergency procurement exercise. When you imagine that under COVID, how people were suffering, how the country was suffering, some people use COVID to make business and use COVID to make business on taxpayers' money. And today we have the guts to give you a lesson. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Director of Audit, again in his report, stated that the interest of government was not adequately safeguarded. since advance payment of the full contract value were effected to suppliers before delivery of the item. So you are getting paid before you deliver. So if there's a problem, so the supplier has nothing to worry. It has already been paid. Okay? And again, clause of late delivery was not included as a condition in the letter of acceptance issued to the supplier and therefore was not applicable. Mr. Speaker, they used emergency procurement to acquire material and equipment quickly. The whole purpose of emergency procurement so that you get delivered very quick. And you don't put a clause on late delivery. But for me, either this was done from incompetence or it was done on purpose. It was done on purpose so that they can get away with murder, and that's what happened, Mr. Speaker. Sir. The lack of monitoring in the midst of the crisis has resulted in some 94 million rupees paid for defective ventilators and 853 million for medical disposables purchased from companies which has no history of providing medical products to government, and abnormally high prices paid to by the Ministry of Health, up to 67 times higher than the lowest price paid for the medical disposable by the ministry. When you think of this, Mr. Speaker, if I take an example, if the ministry have bought a drug or an equipment or a disposable for, let's say, 1,000 rupees during COVID, you know how much we paid for the same material? We paid it 67,000 rupees. And we have to accept this. And up to now, there has been no reaction on the government side, I must say. And also, the Director of Audits also stated that no documentary evidence in respect of authorization of medical products acquired for some 1.7 billion was produced to national audit officers by the different ministries and departments. National audit staff was informed that decisions were taken by a committee set up at the level of Ministry of Health, for which neither the agenda nor minutes of decision taken were available. And their excuse was that instruction had been received from the high-level committee for COVID, set under the aegis of the Prime Minister's office, for which, as I said, no documentary evidence was produced, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, preliminary lessons from the current situation suggest, these are the words of the Director of Audit, that we need to rethink risk and contract management framework. In future procurement procedures and contracts, to ensure that emergency procurement in the public sector does not turn out to become a fertile ground for commission and financial abuses and malpractices. I say it again, these are not my words, these are the words of the Director of Audit. It is high time that the accountability and transparency in the field of public procurement be reviewed. There may be temptation to focus only on the pressing needs created by the pandemic and to sideline consideration for accountability and transparency. We know the argument of government was that we had to buy urgently. But, Mr. Speaker, sir, nothing justifies the flouting of the principles of good governance when it involves public funds. Nothing justifies this, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I must emphasize that the Director of Audit has been very courageous in underlying and denouncing numerous cases of malpractices which could tantamount to fraud. Monsieur le Président, c'est une motion de blâme qu'il a délivrée à l'encontre de ce gouvernement. Now, let me move on another item that has been canvassed by the Director of Audit, and also which has been subject to several PQs in the House. It relates to Mobank. Mr. Speaker, over the years and up to 30th of June 2020, government has invested a total of 5.2 billion rupees as equity injection in Mobank Holding Limited. It was invested in 2019 and also in 2020. And I must say, out of this investment, not a rupee of dividend has been paid to government out of these 5.2 billion rupees. The auditors mention in their report, as far as non-performing loans that were transferred from Mobank Holding through a subsidiary, the subsequent recovery may represent a major challenge, as this loan has originally been granted without proper credit base and without adequate conditions and collaterals. How do you want a bank to make profit if they lend money to someone who doesn't give any collateral or doesn't give any proper mortgage? In view of the negative group equity, the auditors of Mobank has had to take an undertaking from its shareholders, that is the government of Mauritius. And for this, the Ministry of Finance had issued a letter of comfort, that is, government had to guarantee Mobank for the loans that has had to be impaired. And also the recovery for loans that have already been given, it represents only 1.2 million out of 5.1 billion rupees, Mr. Speaker. And up to now, Mobank Holding has an accumulated losses of 5.9 billion rupees in 2018, and in 2019, 6.3 billion rupees. Mr. Speaker, sir, I'm tempted to say this is what we call throwing good money after bad. This is a clear example of throwing good money after bad, what is happening in Mobank. Now, let me move to another project, which again, we are talking only about billions today. I don't know whether it was, I didn't do it on purpose, but when I read the auditor's report, the project was only billion, Mr. Speaker. So it relates to the Safe City project. The police force has signed 2 contracts on an operating lease model with Mauritius Telecom for the implementation of Safe City project. The contract amount was USD 465 million, as I said, USD, exclusive of VAT. There are some disturbing facts, and also we have been subject to a PNQ by the leader opposition, whereas the lease agreements were not made available to national audit officers. Access provided to only certain extracts of the agreements. The police service explained that the arguments could not be provided due to a clause of mutual non-disclosure under the terms and conditions of the agreement. But Section 110, bracket 2 of the Constitution of the Republic of Mauritius provides that the public accounts of Mauritius and all courts of law and all authorities and officers of the government shall be audited and reported by the Director of Audit, and for that purpose, the Director of Audit or any person authorized by him in that behalf shall have access to all books and records, reports, and other documents relating to those accounts. It is crystal clear the powers of the Director of Audit, which is guaranteed by the Constitution. He has a right of access to every document when it's written in relation to taxpayers' money. The constitutionality, the auditors remarks were the constitutionality of clauses in contracts that deprives the Director of Audit of access to public records for audit purposes is questionable. The police informed National Audit that the advice of Attorney General Office was being sought on this matter, and we don't know where matters stand in relation to that. But, Mr. Speaker, what is more troubling is that even though the lease agreement were not made available on the pretext of non-disclosure clause, but payment vouchers, supporting documents, invoices, even this also was not made available. We understand the contract can be confidential, even though we cannot have access, but the Directorate should have had access. But what about when payments were being done? What about payment vouchers, invoices, and so on? That's why the Director stated in his report that the accuracy and validity of payments made couldn't be ascertained. And since we are on Safe City, Mr. Speaker, everybody knows that our society is in very bad shape in terms of law and order and security. There's a big problem of insecurity. People are being attacked, killed. Violence is on the rise. No place is reassuring. The protection of every citizen must be of utmost importance. Mr. Speaker, cameras of Safe City cost the Mauritians, the state, taxpayers, the trifle sum of 20 billion rupees. And the main objective of such a massive investment was to enhance public order, security, and to help combat all sorts of crime. How come that when there is a need to elucidate a crime, images deemed essential, crucial, suddenly disappear? We invested 20 billion rupees in camera to help combat crime, but when we badly needed those images, it suddenly disappear. As I said, such a huge sum of public money was invested. Mr. Speaker, this kind of casualness is simply unacceptable. Government has been boasting on Safe City camera, but when put on trial, in the case of Kisnan, they failed miserably. How do you want Mauritians to have faith in government project, the more so managed by the police? How do you want the Mauritians to have faith in this government and in this police force? That's why people in Mauritius have little or no trust in the police force. With l'affaire Kisnan, Safe City project has lost all its credibility, Mr. Speaker, sir. And c'est pas avec de gaieté de cœur que je dis cela, Mr. Speaker, because it's with our money that this project has been done. And in the same line of thought, even in the prison, also the camera are not functioning, Mr. Speaker. This has been subject to numerous questions by myself and by my colleagues on the opposition side. And this also has been canvassed by the Director of Audit. Yet another example of poor management of public funds. Those cameras hasn't been functioning since 2014, and no decision has been taken to replace them. If it was faulty since 2013 and 14. But replace it. Every year we hear from in the House that this was done by the previous government. Fair enough. But if we have a problem, fix it. You don't sleep over it. And in relation to those cameras, how not to forget the declaration, statement of the former Commissioner of Prison to the effect that he does not believe in camera. How can we forget that, Mr. Speaker, sir? And you know what happened after he made this statement, this fracas? He was promoted advisor to the Prime Minister on matters of prison. I guess what he will advise the Prime Minister, maybe he will tell him to remove all the cameras of the Safe City. because he doesn't believe in camera. This is in total contradiction with government's policy of installing camera around the island. And as I said, he was promoted advisor to the Prime Minister, but I must check also whether he was decorated for independence. Mr. Speaker, sir, let me again come to something which I only took cognizance of this issue too yesterday or day before, and I was showing this to my friend, Honorable Utim, some really disturbing and again shocking fact, again in the report of the Director of Audit, which I must say has gone unnoticed. Me, myself, it's only 2 days that I saw that in the report. It's in relation to public sector bodies' pension fund deficit. In fact, this is the last part of the report. That is why maybe we have omitted such a huge thing. You know, the public sector bodies' pension fund deficit total a whopping sum of 26 billion rupees. 26 billion rupees, that is, there is a deficit in the pension funds of public sector bodies. And I will try to explain because it's a bit technical. I will try to simplify things. The financial statement of 60 public sector bodies, only 60 because there are more, submitted to the National Audit Office, showed that their pension fund under defined benefit pension plan were running deficits totaling 20 billion in 2018. And a review of 63 public sector bodies submitted to the Director of Audit, when aggregate all the deficit, comes up to 26 billion rupees as at 30th of June 2019. These figures are from 2019. You know, Mr. Speaker, what does that entail? What does that mean? Say, for example, CWA or CB. And I'm sure they are on the list because they are public sector bodies. It means that the pension that will be payable to its employees when they go on retirement would not be totally possible because there is not enough money. There is not enough money to pay those pensions. As I said, the fund is in deficit. This situation is of grave concern, Mr. Speaker, and it should be addressed now because year after year the deficit increases. I've just given the figures. In 2018, it was 22 billion rupees. In 2019, it's 26 billion rupees. This is what I call, Mr. Speaker, this is what I call a time bomb. We are sitting on a time bomb in relation to pension fund. It would be totally irresponsible from government not to pay heed to this matter. There are solutions. There are solutions, and experts, namely actuaries, must be consulted. I think I've made my point in relation to that, and that government pays heed to this issue because for me it's a very important issue. And how not to come to CSG? When we think what's happening in defined pension fund, this how to bring us to the contribution sociale généralisée, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's a total mystery how the CSG will be financed in 2024. It's a total mystery. I will be really grateful to the Minister of Finance if he could enlighten the House and the population on such an important matter. Because even the actuaries can't figure how this is going to work. He only has a recipe how CSG will be financed after 2024, after we have heard what's going on in defined pension contribution. I really hope that this issue is taken up by the Minister of Finance when he sums up the debate. Now, Mr. Speaker, I would like to I would like to say a few words on the offshore sector before I conclude. The offshore sector in Mauritius took birth in the 1990s, and since then, much has happened. It is good to highlight that the offshore model was endorsed by major economies of the world, as this has enabled and propelled FDI into the global economy, and most importantly in emerging economies, such as India and in our more recent context in Africa. Our financial sector witnessed a sustained growth amidst financial crisis. It is the first time since its advent that the offshore sector witnessed a decelerated growth rate, greatly due to COVID-19. With the global minimum tax lurking in the background, as a palpable threat, it is crucial that we as a jurisdiction, we are prepared to face such a challenge. We will try to impose that over the world. It is a challenge. We cannot just welcome everything just like that. Till now, we have just heard the intention of implementing such a system, but we do not know how we will proceed. There is also the fact that before accepting any change, we must consider our domestic law. The financial sector contributes 13% of GDP and employs 8,635 people. It is a sector that supports and provides high-value employment. It employs both Mauritians and foreigners. This sector represents the future. There are many opportunities for young graduates in this sector for posts like accountant, company secretary, and asset managers, among others. It is a sector that has withstood the economic downturn caused by COVID, so we need to deploy all efforts to safeguard, keep afloat, and revamp this sector. We are again at a crossroad. It is imperative that we are removed from the adverse blacklist and grey list. We need to strive for more transparency in the way the offshore sector operates. While measures and effort under the current mandate has been made, although we had no choice but to put all the odds on our side to come out of the adverse listing by international bodies, government needs to put additional effort in terms of strategy, new lines of business, and renewed diplomacy. And coming to diplomacy, Mr. Speaker, sir, I believe that this has been lacking during the last mandate. Little or nothing has been done to nurture diplomatic relations with our African counterparts. We are an African jurisdiction, and hence we need to strengthen ties with African brothers. C'est incontournable that Africa is a jurisdiction of the future, and we, being an African country, should leverage on this. We are a premier financial jurisdiction, and this has been recognized by international bodies like Mo Ibrahim, Index, and many more. We often brand that we are the platform, the gateway to Africa. What does that mean? It means that as a mature financial jurisdiction, we must act as a bridge between major economies and African countries to facilitate investments. We must provide a platform that is conducive to investment and in line with the current exigencies of investors. And this is a dynamic environment. We should be cognizant of technology needs, and I must say the introduction of FSC1 is a positive measure towards digitalization of process and ease of doing business. It means that with sophisticated products, we should enable the growing wealth in Africa to be invested in or via Mauritius. It means with a reliable banking sector, we should be able to offer solutions, including digital solutions. We should be the one that enables Africa to grow. This is our contribution to Africa. Notwithstanding the challenges that have arisen over the years, our financial services sector has been resilient and has adapted itself. The mindset of the past is not sufficient in the actual context. It is a survival of the fittest. Hence, we need to think ahead of the curve and plan. have a strategic roadmap, and I mean not just a document that is shelved, but an actual and realistic plan that needs to be rolled out and implemented. Moreover, for the better growth of this sector, it is important that there are constant discussions with all partners and stakeholders. Mr. Speaker, sir, to conclude, as a patriot, we look forward to being removed from all the adverse lists at the earliest. And with the reopening of our borders, we really hope for a much-needed boost to our economic landscape. I'm done, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Hasnu, you will speak when we resume.
seated.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I wish to raise a point of clarification. Earlier, when answering to a supplementary question to the PNQ put by the leader of opposition, I mentioned that Jonathan Ramasamy accompanied the then Minister of Commerce to Paris. Actually, this is not correct. The permanent secretary of the Ministry of Commerce, the then commercial manager of SCC, a representative of the SLO, and a representative of SGS Mauritius accompanied the then minister to Paris. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, sir, at the very outset, allow me to say a few words about Sir Anirudh Jagnat. Maybe the new generation do not appreciate the economic and social condition prevailing in the 70s, 1970s, and early 80s. At that time, poverty was rife in the country. Unemployment level was catastrophic. As a young pediatrician working in the hospital service in the early 80s, I saw how many babies and children lost their life with preventable conditions like malnutrition, gastroenteritis, etc. The facilities in our hospital were rudimentary, sometimes 2 to 3 persons sharing the same bed at the same time. The government did not have enough money to buy rice to feed the population. It was a very difficult time. We were even considering feeding the population on patat and manioc during the World War II in the 1940s. That is the time when Sir Anirudh Jagnat took the reign of the country. And in 5 years' time, the country had changed and was on its way to become a more prosperous country. A feat which was acclaimed by not just the Mauritian, but many foreign countries and international institutions. Secondly, his fight against drugs baron in Mauritius. He was the only prime minister who set up 2 commissions of inquiries to find a solution to this scourge. It is not an easy task. And even countries like the United States, with all the means at their disposal, is still having difficulty to solve this problem. At least he had the courage and the determination to try to find a solution to this problem. Name me one past prime minister who has set up even one commission of inquiry on drugs. There are so many facets of his prime ministership which we can discuss. But the last one I would like to mention is his unflinching determination in his fight to complete our decolonization process and to recover the Sagos archipelago. Mr. Speaker, sir, who does not remember when he, at the age of 90 years, put on his lawyer's gown and went to plead this case personally at the Internal Court of Justice at La Haye? He was always convinced that Mauritius was right in this fight, and he did manage to convince the judges. And the rest, Mr. Speaker, is history. May I also seize the opportunity to convey my sincere condolences to Lady Sarojini, to our Prime Minister and his family in this difficult time. Mr. Speaker, sir, thank you for giving me the opportunity to contribute to the debate on the budget speech 2021-2022 under the theme Better Together. Before going any further, I wish to congratulate my colleague, Dr. Padeachi, Minister of Finance, for his second budget speech, which I'm confident will enable our country to address this unprecedented economic crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. On listening to members of the opposition, I get the impression as if they do not know in what context the budget exercise was prepared. The world has been devastated by COVID-19 pandemic. Millions of people have been infected and millions have lost their life across the globe. The economic situation in all countries have been severely affected. And naturally, this has impacted severely on the population at large, leading to massive job loss and poverty across the world. This was also associated with the closure of the borders, leading to massive disruption of the air services, leading again to disruption of the international business and here in Mauritius, more importantly, the tourism industry. It is in this context that the Minister of Finance has prepared this budget. So can we expect the budget to be the usual run-of-the-mill budget? That is what some members of the opposition forget and rather pretend not to understand. In Mauritius here, we have had 2 general lockdowns and several red zones. The tourism industry, which is one of our major engines of growth, has grinded to an almost complete halt. The contribution to GDP of the tourism sector in Mauritius, direct and indirect, was around 23%, that is 62 billion rupees in 2019, as compared to 2%, that is only 17 billion in 2020. Prior to the pandemic, the government vision was to attain 1.6 million tourists by the end of 2020. That is to increase the tourism earning to 71 billion and to create around 2,200 employment. But unfortunately, with the COVID pandemic, this did not materialize. The lockdown has also significantly affected other sectors of the economy, as well as leading to massive loss of jobs for thousands of people with associated consequential poverty. With this budget, the Minister of Finance is trying to kickstart the economy by giving an exceptional boost to the economy, saving a new economic architecture, and restoring confidence. Besides, the Minister of Finance came up with strategies to implement social measures to cater for the vulnerable group of our society, as well as introducing incentive and a scheme for the ease of doing business, and especially for the SME sector. The second major problem which is facing Mauritius after COVID-19 is climate change. Our country has been victim of several episodes of flash flood in the recent years, where we have witnessed loss of property and loss of lives. This is a very serious issue which the Minister of Finance has addressed in this budget by allocating 11.7 billion for a national flood management program. Mr. Speaker, sir, most of our citizens have appreciated and lauded the measures in the budget, except for some members of the opposition for whom, malheureusement, n'en est pas bon. It pains me when I look at some of the cheap comments made by some members of the opposition on the budget. C'est un plagiat, un baiser rempli de mensonges, des fausses promesses, chiffres manipulés, enfonce Maurice d'un trou, visé pas dynamique. What have we not heard from the opposition side, Mr. Speaker, sir? Allow me to take a few points raised by some members of the opposition. The second member of constituency number 2 said, 13 years later, we are still having flood. I must say I was sorry to hear that from him. Because there is a global climate change. Even if we put one drain in each and every house, Mr. Speaker, we would not be able to prevent flooding. According to a study conducted by 300 scientists in 20 countries, and which just came out on this week, the global warming may have already passed the irreversible tipping point, which means from now on, climate is going to get worse and worse. We in Mauritius, for the foreseeable future, we should brace ourselves for all sorts of climate-related disasters. The fourth member of constituency number 3, he stated that this present budget is réchauffé de l'année dernière. He mentioned that the sports center of Plaine Verte was mentioned last year and again this year. When you look at the budget for last year, for the construction of the sport infrastructure at Planvert, only 6 million rupees was approved in the budget estimate. And that was for the consultancy service to start the project. Whereas this year, the project value has been mentioned as 151.5 million rupees. And this is for the construction of the sports center. The first one last year was for the consultancy, and this year it's for the construction, which shows, Mr. Speaker, that some people do not even have an idea how projects are implemented in the government, and it clearly shows their ignorance. The same member was also making a lot of insinuation about corruption in his speech. He is true to himself, Mr. Speaker, sir. Someone who has been found guilty by a court of law for bribing a police officer is now coming to give us a lesson on morality. I leave the House for the House to judge, Mr. Speaker. As far as Honourable Member of the third member of constituency number 5 came yesterday with a long list of projects which apparently has not been started or not completed. I've just taken just a few, Mr. Speaker. The Plaza Theatre, phase 3. There was a bidding exercise was carried out. One aggrieved bidder challenged the decision that was taken. Firstly, he went to the independent review panel. Secondly, he went for a judicial review, and now that had gone to the Supreme Court. And now how can we at local government proceed with the project? Just a second example. District Council head office at Flak. This was delayed partly because of the COVID pandemic lockdown. But here, 90% of the work has been completed and is going to be fully operational by the end of September 2021, Mr. Speaker. Multipurpose hall at Port List in Planvert, la route militaire. Again, according to him, nothing is being done. This project is completed, Mr. Speaker, and because of COVID, the engineer, the contractor, could not do the asphalting for the parking. The Sports Center of Planvert, I think I've explained. Incinerators. Incinerators, the COVID pandemic last year, it slowed down the project. We have the engineers who came from India, but unfortunately, because of family situations, they had to go back. We could not proceed with it. That was one issue. And secondly, there was a conflict between the main contractor in India and the local partner. And how is the local government at fault in this? I can go. For Long Mountain Incinerator, pareil encore. The first site that was chosen was objected by the resident. The second site that was decided upon, again, was objected by a resident. And only the third site which we have got from Terra, and the work is progressing. Is the local government to be blamed? I can go on like that. I mean, he mentioned about excavator at District Council of Pamplemousse. We don't have one person trained to drive this machine. But he doesn't know, he was a councillor there, that when we bought that excavator, somebody was trained by the guy who sells that to us, by the supplier, was a trained one guy to drive this excavator. And we have stuff there. So what I'm trying to say, there's a lot of inconsistency from what he said yesterday. Unfortunately, since the two lockdowns in 2020, this has caused some delay in the implementation of our project. It's a fact. But I can assure the House that I chair the Project Implementation Monitoring Committee to check on the progress of all the major projects in all local authorities every month, Mr. Speaker. So to come and to say with kind of cheap comment, I think it was not acceptable. If you allow me to come back to my speech, what some members of the opposition don't realize, or do not want to realize, is that we are amongst the few countries in the world to have come up with such exceptional economic measures to boost up our economy during this pandemic, which has caused havoc across the world. Despite this difficult economic situation, we are expecting a 9% GDP growth for the fiscal year 21-22, while other developed countries are struggling to sustain their economic growth. Mr. Speaker, sir, this budget is underpinned by a spate of innovative, bold, and sensitive strategies and action for the transformation of the economic landscape of Mauritius, such as boosting investment, poverty alleviation, improving disaster and risk management, and sustainable development and green initiative. Development cannot be achieved at the expense of the people. The motto of this government has always been to ensure that nobody is left behind. To that effect, I welcome the consolidation of our welfare state and the substantial increase in the various support schemes for poverty alleviation in the last 2 years. Mr. Speaker, sir, now I'm going to say a few words about my ministry. Local government, which serves a twofold purpose, has a fundamental role in the implementation of these strategies and action for the realization of our shared goal. The first purpose is that of providing services, whereas the other is to represent and involve citizens in determining specific local public needs and how best these needs can be met. In furtherance of the first objective, local authorities have been at the core of containing the COVID-19 crisis. They have played a key role in the fight against COVID pandemic and provision of service during confinement period and even in the red zone. These services include cleaning and disinfection programs across the island, Mr. Speaker, continuous provision of basic services such as scavenging services, street lighting, and the provision of amenities used as vaccination centers. However, now local authorities must rise to the challenge ahead and drive future development in their respective jurisdiction by creating sustainable impacts through the announced growth strategies. To further enhance the services of local authorities, my ministry is acquiring 17 tipper lorries and 7 lorries with crane for a total amount of 85 million. Same are expected to be delivered in July 2021. Additionally, 51 scavenging lorries, 10 lighting lorries, 2 vacuum road sweeper lorries, which we don't have before, and 2 truck mounted with jetting unit to clean the drain, purpose complex and sport facilities. In November 2020, an additional amount of 1 billion rupees was provided as the economic recovery program for additional projects, some of which obviously are still in progress. To pave the way for the materialization of our objective, we will not only maintain but increase our investment in these development project facilities and amenities. As such, I welcome the investment of an additional amount of 3 billion rupees under the economic recovery program and 5.7 billion rupees in community development projects, such as construction of market fairs, sport amenities, health track, and traffic centers in all local authorities across the island. This project will benefit our fellow citizens, thus bringing new and additional services closer to them, while enhancing their quality and way of life. It is to be noted that the following projects for an amount of 900 million rupees are currently at procurement stage and will kickstart hopefully within the next quarter of 2021. The new market fair at Chemegrenier, the renovation of Plaza Theatre if everything goes all right, multipurpose complex at Abercrombie, sports center at Plaine Verte, new market fair at Pamplemousse, headquarters of the District Council of Savane, multipurpose complex at Rivière-du-Rempart. An additional amount of 900 million rupees has been allocated in the next financial year to start the following project, just to name but a few. The Port Louis Theatre, Phase 2, renovation of Corum Gymnasium, Recreation Park at Fort-Court, Quatre-Bonnes, Traffic Center at Bel Air, integrated sport amenities at Bassin, and gymnasium at St. Felix and Stanley, just to quote but a few, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sir, although we have been through a period of lockdown and partial confinement, local authorities have successfully implemented several major projects at a cost of 400 million rupees in the last few months. These are administrative buildings for the district of Flack and Pamplemousse, new market fair at Bel Air, leisure park at Cauchy Militaire, and multipurpose complex at NSDC complex Seranium Camp-les-Vieux. Mr. Speaker, sir, the implementation of the Metro Express project has given rise to opportunities for the redevelopment of strategically located areas in and around our city and town into modern urban terminals. Accordingly, with a view to uplifting and enhancing the image of our city and town centers, 6 modern urban terminals incorporating state-of-the-art architecture would be developed through private sector participation along the metro corridor from Portlaoise to Keerpik. As a major transport interchange at the most strategic location of the city and towns, the urban terminals are expected to be iconic buildings, accommodating a mixed-use development comprising of major amenities, commercial space, leisure and entertainment, market, food court, and dedicated hawkers areas. In addition to the potential for private investment to the tune of 10 billion rupees, their contribution toward boosting employment in these areas is not to be underestimated. In the same breath, we are witnessing the rapid progress of work at Victoria Urban Terminal. The phase 1 is expected to be completed by the end of this year. Phase 2, that is a relocation of 1,000 hawkers, God willing, by March and April 2022. And phase 3,